Liberal feminism often finds itself in a never-ending cycle of explanation, where women bear the burden of educating their oppressors in hopes of change. The mantra, "When they go low, we go high," encapsulates this approach. When a man rapes, liberal feminists educate him on consent. When he abuses, they teach him about power dynamics and the cycle of abuse. When an unintended pregnancy occurs, they educate him on abortion. When he forgets the kid's allergies or neglects household responsibilities, they educate him on the mental load and emotional labour. The belief is that men, as the oppressor class, remain ignorant, and through patient education, women can inspire them to change. This cycle of education is often powered by hope, the hope that each new concept like consent or emotional labour is revolutionary enough to finally break through the barriers of ignorance. Women invest time and emotional energy into explaining, believing that men will one day understand and, by extension, change. But too often, these efforts seem to disappear into the void, consumed by a system that prioritises men's ignorance and women's labour. This is where the idealism of liberal feminism begins to show its limits. Liberal feminism is rooted in an idealist framework, one that believes ideas and education can change material conditions. The philosophy assumes that societal contradictions, such as the power imbalances between men and women, can be addressed through enough awareness, conversation, and intellectual engagement. The hope is that once men understand issues like consent, emotional labour, or reproductive rights, they will change their behaviour. The problem, however, is that this focus on education places the responsibility for societal change squarely on women's shoulders. The liberal feminist approach assumes that oppression is a result of ignorance, that men's power is merely the result of misunderstanding, and that through patient instruction, they can be made to see the error of their ways. It presumes that education alone can dismantle the deeply ingrained structures of patriarchy. But what this fails to acknowledge is that patriarchy is not a system maintained by ignorance. It is maintained by material advantages and systems that directly benefit men. Materialist feminism offers a grounded critique of liberal feminism's reliance on education. Materialism asserts that ideas alone cannot change material conditions. Rather, real change happens when economic, legal, and social systems are transformed. Women's oppression is not merely a result of men misunderstanding the dynamics of consent or emotional labour. It is sustained by legal systems, economic structures, and cultural norms that give men control and power over women's lives. For example, it wasn't until women won the legal right to inherit property that they could begin to leave abusive relationships. The right to abortion wasn't secured through education, but through legal fights that gave women control over their reproductive lives. Equal marriage rights weren't achieved by educating the public on equality, but by legal victories that granted them the material ability to form families and build economic independence outside of heteronormative structures. Materialist feminism argues that only through changes in these material structures can real progress be made. It is not men's ignorance that upholds patriarchy, but the systems that enable them to continue exploiting women. Economic dependence, lack of legal protections, and social isolation are the tools that patriarchy uses to maintain control. The focus, then, must shift from educating men to dismantling the systems that allow them to hold power over women in the first place. While liberal feminism frames the problem as men's ignorance, materialist feminism argues that the real ignorance lies in the oppressed class's inability to fully recognize the extent of their exploitation. Patriarchy works by clouding women's understanding of their own subjugation, making them believe that their oppression is natural, inevitable, or personal, rather than systemic. By placing the burden of education on women, liberal feminism reinforces the idea that women must continually work to prove their worth and their suffering, rather than focusing on collective action to challenge their oppression. The key, materialist feminists argue, is not educating men, but empowering women to recognize their own exploitation and take action against it. Women are not oppressed because men don't understand emotional labour. They are oppressed because economic, political, and social systems allow men to exploit women's labor without consequence. The solution is not to educate the oppressor, but to dismantle the structures that give him power in the first place. Proponents of liberal feminism might argue that education is an essential first step in raising awareness and building empathy. And while education certainly has its place in the broader feminist movement, it cannot be the sole strategy for liberation. Raising awareness can help spark conversations and inspire change, but it cannot dismantle the systems that keep women oppressed. Teaching men about consent does little if there are no legal consequences for sexual violence. Explaining emotional labor doesn't relieve women of their burdens unless structural changes, like paid family leave or equitable division of household work, are implemented. Liberal feminism's focus on education risks placing the onus of change on women's emotional labor, reinforcing the very dynamics it seeks to dismantle. By constantly educating and explaining, women remain trapped in the role of caretakers and nurturers, even in their efforts to fight for equality. To truly liberate women, feminism must move beyond education and focus on material change. This means advocating for stronger legal protections, economic independence, and institutional support for women. It means fighting for policies that ensure access to reproductive health care, protect women from violence, and provide economic security. Only when women have these material resources can they escape the cycle of exploitation that patriarchy enforces. The real work of feminism is not educating the oppressor, but organizing the oppressed. Women must be empowered to understand the systems that exploit them and take collective action to challenge those systems. This shift from education to action is where materialist feminism offers a more powerful and practical path to liberation. Liberal feminism's reliance on education as the primary tool for change, while well-intentioned, often leaves women trapped in a cycle of endless explanation. Men, as the oppressor class, are allowed to remain ignorant while women bear the burden of educating them. This idealist approach, which believes that changing minds will change the world, fails to address the material realities of women's oppression. Materialist feminism offers a more grounded response, arguing that only through material changes, economic independence, legal rights, and systemic support can women truly escape the structures of patriarchy. The real work of feminism lies not in educating the oppressors, but in empowering the oppressed to see their own exploitation and take collective action. It is time to move beyond education and towards transformation,